mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 6 of HBO's Winning Time, entitled Memento, Mori. In this episode, the title comes from a Shakespeare line that Paul Westhead quotes. Apparently it means, remember you will die, which apparently he takes in a much more bleaker way than the person he was speaking it to. But we see a lot of Shakespeare lines delivered by Paul, particularly in this episode, as that is his comfort place. So, we'll talk a little bit about that, but this episode deals with kind of like three major plot points that I want to discuss. We have the fallout from Jack's accident and Paul having to come to grips with coaching the team. We have Bus dealing with the bank, as well as being in denial about, I think, his mother's condition. And then we have Magic and his situation with his shoe deal, as well as the girl that he's been seeing, Cindy, and her father, and how that whole dynamic plays out. So I'm going to talk about those three things, kind of just, that's how I'm going to break down this episode. I don't want to give myself too much credit, making me sound like some kind of incredible analyst talking about I'm going to break down the episode, but I'm going to talk about those. I'm going to talk about this episode via those three plot points, and then I got a few things I want to discuss at the end in my thoughts section that I just think are interesting. So I'm going to start with Jack's storyline. He wakes up, well, I almost said he wakes up in a coma. The episode starts with him in a coma, and Paul essentially has to coach the team. And there's a nice little line where he says something like, where Buzz asks him, like, okay, can you coach the next game? And he's like, yeah, I can do one game. And I just thought that was funny because he ends up doing the whole rest of the season in the playoffs. But he has an interesting set of circumstances in this episode because he has so much self-doubt. You know, he has a great line at the beginning of the episode where he says he had to come to grips with the idea that he just might only be able to help other people be great. And he walks around quoting Shakespeare and doing all this stuff, and no one knows what the hell he's talking about. And he's worried about whether or not he can coach the team. And he's trying to, instead of put his own, instead of coaching the way he wants to, he's trying to figure out a way to do what Jack would do. And eventually he works his way up to coming to grips with what he wants to do. Like there's a scene very briefly where you could tell that he knows what he wants to do, but he's kind of denying it. And it's about whether or not he wants to start Michael Cooper or start Spencer Haywood against the Nuggets and David Thompson. And I have a whole bit, not a bit, I'm not a comedian, but I have a whole thing in the thoughts about that whole situation. But he clearly wants to start Michael Cooper. He feels like Jack would start Haywood. And I feel like I don't feel like, he's conflicted about what he wants to do and whether or not he's going to do what he wants to do or going to try to do what Jack wants to do. He eventually works up the balls to, at the very start of the game, or just prior to telling Cooper that he's going to start and that Haywood's going to be on the bench. He does it in a very sassy way too, but Haywood thinks it's personal because Paul overheard him saying something that, well, it wasn't that bad about Paul, but he overheard it and he wondered if it was personal. And Paul's like, nope, this was a business decision, bro. It was a basketball decision. Had nothing to do with what you said. But the concept, I think, behind the Jack portion of this episode, well, essentially what happens is we have these moments that seem to be kind of fantasy, where Jack is imagining how he's going to handle David Thompson. And I think we're meant to believe that probably because that was what was on his mind prior to the bike accident, during the time that he was in a coma, his brain was actively just working up ways to stop David Thompson. I think that's to help give us insight into what kind of person Jack McKinney is, that even in a coma, he's still trying to figure out the next coaching issue, which is David Thompson. And we end the episode with him waking up and after coming up with a plan to stop David Thompson. Apparently this was such a great moment for his brain that it then woke him up. But we find out it's been 2 weeks since that game. But I'm going to talk, we don't find out what happened in that game, by the way, but I'm going to tell you what happened in that game because I just thought it was interesting because they put so much effort into that game. as to how they explained what Jack was going through, presumably in his coma. I think that's what we're meant to take from it, and what Paul was dealing with for having to coach the team. And they used this game against Denver and David Thompson to tell those two stories. And I thought, within the context of the show, it doesn't matter what happened in that game. Like, we know that game was how Paul was able to get out of his own head and step into his role as the head coach. And also, presumably, because of course we couldn't really know this is how, lets us know what kind of person Jack is, and how this was essentially able to bring him out of his coma. And like, his whole time in this coma was him trying to figure out, like, he was in coma for 2 weeks because it took him 2 weeks to figure out how to stop David Thompson. But yeah, that was an interesting portion of this episode. I didn't say it at the top, but again, I continue to find the show to be very strong. It's very entertaining. It's an easy watch, one that you can just be entertained by. But it also deals a lot. It also finds a way to deal in personal issues as well. And this episode did a lot with that, by what I mentioned about Jack in the coma, thinking about David Thompson. Paul trying to get past his hangups and becoming coach. And then we have some personal stuff that we deal with as well with Jerry Buss and with Magic. So I'm going to move on to talking about Buss. He meets up with the people from Great Western Bank, and essentially he kind of stiffs them, but does it in such a happy, jovial, and kind way that he makes it sound like he's doing them a favor. But essentially, we talked about the balloon loan and the balloon payment, and how this money was due, and then the whole thing with giving the team to his wife. And that all kind of plays out in this scene where he meets with the bank. One of the guys is played by the guy from Kevin Can Fuck Himself, which I thought was interesting. I'd never seen that guy before, and now I see him on this as well. But Jerry essentially tells the bank that they're not going to pay, and that in exchange for just wanting to just being part of the Lakers experience and investing in the Lakers and being in business with the Lakers, and what a great opportunity that is. In exchange for that, they want the bank to extend the loan term, open a new line of credit. I'm trying to see that right, because he asked for so much shit. Yeah, new line of credit. Okay, I think that was it. He says he's not paying it back. He asked for the extension, the new line of credit, and then the one guy goes, well, what's going to happen if we demand payment now? And he basically says, we're going to declare bankruptcy. You won't get shit. And the guy from Kevin Can Fuck Himself was like, well, we do get the team. And then he's like, the team belongs to my wife, so you don't even get that. And then he's kind of just like, essentially gives him like the pat on the back, like, all right, well, I'll see you guys later. You guys talk about that. And good luck. It's almost mean what he does with a smile on his face. But the plan ends up screwed, because we find out that Jerry's mother, it seems to be losing a bit of her cognitive abilities. We saw, I think it was last week, when I keep forgetting the names. Jeannie is the daughter, I think. I can't remember the names of the mother and daughter. I keep getting them confused. But I believe the daughter is Jeannie. She goes to visit the mother to pick her up for opening night, and she don't even know what day it is. Like, I don't know, is this opening day? Oh, I'm not ready. She seems frazzled. And then in this episode, we again see that she is frazzled because the patio doors are open. There's a mad surge of wind coming in, papers flying everywhere. She says it smells like something dead is in the walls. She's just not all the way there. And while he's there, Jerry discovers that she never actually filed the paperwork for giving the team to his wife. So now that throws a wrench in his plan, because if the bank doesn't go along with it, the bank actually can own the team. So he has that going on. And throughout the episode, he continues to deny the severity of his mother's condition. Even when Jeannie, seemingly with tears in her eyes, explains that this happened on opening day, he's still just like, you got to chill out. Everything's going to be fine. Which, one, shows that how in denial Jerry is, but also, two, is a very big, I think, indicator that she will not be fine. But we'll see how that plays out. We also have Claire telling him that the vendors are not present for the next game because they were not paid, because Jerry's mother wrote them checks from an account she closed, like, I think he said 5 years ago or something like that. So all of these checks bounced. Just more indications that something's going on with Sally Field's character. the mother. And yeah, Jerry's in denial, and we are inevitably going to see how his mother's decline has an impact on his ability to kind of like keep that face all the time when everything's going wrong. He has every reason to be panicking. He has to be he has to be that swan. that has been like that episode 1 title has kind of been Jerry Buss's theme throughout this season, is that when everything, he's cool on the outside, but he's fucking paddling like crazy on the inside. And we see that with the vendor situation, with the bank with his mother not filing that paperwork. All these things are terrible, and he has to keep that face. And he gets, talked up by Frank at some point in this episode too, and it works, and everything works out. He gets the extension. Everything works out, but it just goes to show you how much Jerry has to do just to kind of like keep everybody sane. Because if he panics, everything goes to shit. So really good stuff again every week from oh my gosh, why am I Riley, John C. Riley. And then lastly with Magic. So Magic's fielding multiple shoe endorsement offers. He turns down a deal with Nike because Nike can't pay him money up front. They can only pay him $1 for every shoe sold and pay him in stock, which was worth 18 cents at the time. We find out at the end of the episode that's, I guess, I don't know if these are the actual numbers, but apparently had Magic taken that deal, the stock that he would have got at 18 cents per share is now $130 something. And that would have amounted to like $5 billion that Magic turned down by not taking the Nike deal. He instead takes the deal with Converse. And I think he seemed to want to consider the Nike deal because Nike offered him a shoe with his name on it. And keep in mind, there have been other athletes who have had shoes named after them, but nobody was a thing until Jordan did it. And it's got to wear on Magic right now that maybe had he taken the Nike deal in 79, maybe the Magic shoe is the Jordan. Like in an alternate universe, Magic takes that deal and Magic shoe is the equivalent of what we have as our Jordans right now. Because you look at the Jordan situation, Jordan makes that deal in his rookie year, and I hear that like Jordan was given stipulations, like he had to do one of multiple things, like win Rookie of the Year, or score 20 a game, or make the All-Star team, or something else. And he did like all of those things. He only had to do one. But now it's 2022, and Jordans are still like insanely popular to the point where they keep making the same shoe. Like they'll just put new colorways of the same shoe out in these retros, and Magic is just sitting here like, man, like he has to think like that could possibly have been me. But he turns down the Nike deal, not just because of the money aspect, but because he had heard that Converse was also courting Larry Bird, and I think that he has the Larry Bird chip on his shoulder, very much so at this point, and he's gonna continue to have it, but he has it on his shoulder at this point. And when he does sign the Converse deal, he signs it for $100,000 solely because he was told that Converse paid Bird 90. So yeah, you could tell that what happens with Larry Bird has a big impact on Magic's decision making and how he goes through his life and how he apparently earns his money. But we also have another situation with Magic where the girl that he's been kind of just fucking around with, Cindy, who we saw her. He was the one that Magic was smashing in like in like a car outside of a church, and I think it was like episode 1. She's been like around, and apparently her father is some kind of big shot lawyer, and he meets with the father. And there's a very interesting scene. There's multiple interesting scenes with this father. The first one is the one I found the most interesting, and he's just kind of going through things with Magic, kind of helping him make the right decisions. This is what you should do. This is what you shouldn't do. And he says basically like you can't do anything. Look, he says Irvin can't do anything that could make Magic look bad. And basically talking about, this is a 1979 conversation about branding, essentially. And Magic goes, well, I don't drink, I don't do no narcotics, so, you should be fine. And then he leans in and he goes, well, what about women? And Magic kind of pauses, and he's like, you can't be messy. Like, you got to keep everything quiet. You have to make sure that everyone stays happy. You just can't be out here, being messy. And I love that scene because that is essentially like he's talking to the guy who's currently, at least from his perspective, with his daughter. So it's almost like he's giving him the green light to fuck around on his daughter just so long as he keeps it quiet. And we later see that business relationship come into play again because like when you say something like that as a father, you're telling them, you know, essentially like, yeah, I know you with my daughter, but you know, if you're going to mess around, you got to keep it quiet. Like it's almost authorized him to fool around his daughter. But that's because he's keeping that relationship. That is a business relationship, not a father of the daughter that Magic is dating relationship. So later in the episode, Magic again wants to make sure that that line is clear. And he doesn't really want to be with Cindy. He doesn't want her to think that they're going to be in a relationship. And I think I read somewhere that Cindy's not a real person, but she's kind of like the embodiment of all of the women who thought that they could be in a relationship with Magic, when in reality, he wasn't going to be in a relationship with nobody but Cookie. And he always told these women that Cookie was always going to be around, and women tried to pry him away from Cookie, and it was never happening. So Cindy's kind of like a one-person embodiment of all of these women. But he wants to, you know, he's like, you know, I'm not going to be in a relationship with Cindy. Like, it's just not going to happen. And he asked the father to tell Cindy for him. And you go, oh, man, the gall of this guy to ask a daughter's father to break up, like to have the father do the breakup for him. And then he hits him with the line that Magic was hit with, that he hit Magic with earlier, which was when he was going to sign the Converse deal. Magic goes, well, what do I say to the people whose deal I'm not going to take? And he goes, you don't worry about that. You're not supposed to be delivering bad news. I'll take care of it. So after Magic asked him to essentially break up with his daughter for him, he almost makes a look and he says, well, like you said, I'm not supposed to be delivering bad news. And you can't say nothing about it. You can't say anything. So after Cindy is like the cause for embarrassment. I don't want to say the cause, because she didn't cause Magic to not go to the hospital with the team. But she brought it to light by bringing those flowers and by doing a little bit too much when Magic was hobnobbing with the bank guys. But due to Cindy causing Magic some embarrassment, that's how he ends up deciding that they can't be together anymore. Plus, I think he knows that she was developing feelings that he wasn't feeling. You know, she says, I love you. He's just like, yeah, I'm just going to go back to eating you out. So, like, he's not interested in that. But yeah, I love that. I love that line that, about you said I'm not supposed to be delivering bad news, man. I don't know what to tell you. But and then that Magic storyline ends with the father delivering tickets to the Lakers and the Pistons. I guess the Lakers are on their way here to Detroit, and he delivers tickets to the game to Cookie, which is what Magic's way of saying, you know, kind of like I choose you, but also there's that extra little bit of making the father do it. Because not only did he have to do the breakup of Magic and his own daughter, but now he's also tasked with giving tickets to, from his perspective, the new girl. But we know Cookie's not the new girl. But yeah, the wild bit of stuff happening there. But yeah, again, I really enjoyed this episode. I like what they did with the characters with Magic. How Magic is almost dickish with what he's making the father do at this point. The situation with the shoe deal. Jerry being in denial about the condition of his mother, Paul and Jack and their situation with David Thompson. I thought all of that was great stuff. So really enjoyed this episode. All right, let me wrap up with my thoughts. David Thompson. David Thompson's mentioned a lot in this episode. And when I think about the reason I remember David Thompson, because David Thompson's before my time. I wasn't born yet. David Thompson before my time. But the reason I remember David Thompson is sometime in like the late 90s, or it might have even been like mid 90s, Shaq and David Robinson were competing for the scoring title. And going into the last day of the season, they were tied or whatever, something like that. It was very close. Shaq scored like 30-something points. And David Robinson, I don't know what he needed to get. I don't remember what he needed to get in order to win the scoring title. But that last day of the season, he scored 71 points and won the scoring title. And the reason that sticks with me was because from that day forward, all that they talked about in the NBA media was how this had happened before with David Thompson. So at the end of whatever year this was, I think it was like 68 or 69, something like that, David Thompson and George Gervin were competing for the scoring title. And on the very last day of the season, David Thompson scored, I think he scored 73, something like that. He scored 70 something as well. And he still fell short of winning the scoring title because George Gervin needed, I think after whatever David Thompson did, George Gervin needed 50 something and he scored 60 something. So George Gervin still won the scoring title, but all they talked about after the David Robinson-Shaq situation was how David Thompson and George Gervin had a last day of the season battle for the scoring title, and David Thompson scored 70-something points, and David Robinson scored 70-something points. So I thought that was cool. That was my way of like, oh, I remember David Thompson. So they didn't reveal, even though, and it's because the episode isn't really about the game against Denver and David Thompson. It's about using that as a way of showing, helping teach us a little bit more about Jack and Paul. But they skipped over what happened in that game, so I figured I would look it up and give you guys the info on what actually happened in this game since they built it up so much. First of all, neither Michael Cooper or Spencer Haywood started this game, which I thought that was one of the most interesting things because that was obviously part of this episode. But I think it's part of the episode because they wanted to build up that drama. Maybe they're working toward a Paul and Spencer Haywood clashing of personalities later, and this is the first step in it. But, maybe that's why they set that up. But neither one of them started that game. So the Lakers won in overtime. David Thompson ended up with 23 points, 2 rebounds, and 2 assists. A decent game. Not anything where it's like, they build it up like, okay, we have to figure out a way to stop this guy from scoring 50 points. Apparently they did so. He had 23, 2, and 2. Kareem had 25, 11, and 8. The 8, though, is not assists, it's blocks. 25 points, 11 rebounds, and 8 blocks. I think he had like 5 assists. Magic had 31 points, 6 rebounds, and 8 assists. And Spencer Haywood, even though he didn't start, he still had a pretty solid game too. He had 14 points, 12 rebounds, and 5 blocks. So interesting little bit of information there. That's how that game ended up. Also in this episode, Mike Epps shows up as Richard Pryor, which is interesting because Mike Epps was supposed to play Richard Pryor in a biopic that this never came to fruition. So I knew, but I forgot that Mike Epps was going to be playing Richard Pryor at some point in this show, and we see that in this episode. So that was pretty cool. There's a couple of funny lines from Paul that I liked in this episode. Jason Segel, you can't have him on here and not have him deliver some good lines. Although he does great work, period. But obviously the funny stuff is really his forte. Jerry Buss calls him Pete. And he says, wrong apostle, my name's Paul. So I just thought that was funny, wrong apostle. And then I like what he said, he didn't want to get buzzard fucked later. Jerry West continues to either serve great lines himself or serve up great lines to other cast members. I liked how, like I said, Paul said he would coach one game, and I know he ended up doing the rest of the season in the playoffs. And then also of note, and I don't know if this is going to be important in the show going forward, but crack is introduced in this episode. And I think that's just interesting because I'm also watching Snowfall, which deals with the cocaine epidemic in LA in the 80s. This kind of like gets the ball rolling on that. Nobody takes the crack in this episode, but it sounds like Spencer Haywood might be on board. And if I don't know enough about Spencer Haywood to know if he had ended up having a drug problem or ended up being a crackhead. I don't know, but I'm wondering if that's what this is being introduced for, to let us see how it gets started with Spencer becoming a crackhead. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't, though, and it's just inconsequential. So enjoy that episode. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts, and I'll see you guys next week for episode 7. Peace.